1967. A capsule bolted to the top of a rocket that has not even been fueled. Inside sit 3 men in full-pressure suits, running a test so routine that nobody at Cape Kennedy expects anything to go wrong. Gus Grissom, Ed White, Roger Chaffee. The clock on the pad keeps ticking, and in a few minutes 2 of the most experienced pilots in the world will be dead, and the third with them, and not one of them will manage to open a door. The spacecraft is called Apollo 1. Its cabin is pressurized with pure oxygen at 16.7 pounds per square inch, higher than the air outside the hatch. That choice keeps the engineering simple and the wiring light. It also turns the interior into something closer to a bomb than a room. Velcro, nylon netting, foam padding, paper checklists, all of it sealed inside an atmosphere where things do not merely burn. They detonate. At 6:31 in the evening, a voltage spike flickers somewhere behind panel. A wire with worn insulation, most likely down near Grissom's feet. A spark finds the oxygen. Within seconds, a wall of flame climbs the left side of the cabin, and the men inside understand exactly what is happening. On the communications loop, a voice, Chaffee's or maybe White's, says the words mission control will replay for the rest of their lives. We have a fire in the cockpit. The hatch is the trap. It opens inward, and it is held shut by the very pressure now rising inside the burning cabin. To escape, Ed White has to haul that door toward himself against a force that grows stronger with every degree of heat. He is strong, a decorated pilot who had already walked in space. He never had a chance. The engineers had built a door that fire itself would weld closed. It took 17 seconds. That is the number investigators settled on, from the first report of flame to the moment the cabin split open and the transmission stopped. 17 seconds is shorter than it takes to read this paragraph aloud. Outside, technicians rushed the gantry through black smoke, burning their hands on the metal, and it still took them 5 long minutes to get the hatch open. By then, there was nothing left to save. What killed them, in the end, was not the flame but the smoke. Carbon monoxide, drawn in through cracked suit hoses, took them before the fire fully could. The bodies were so fused to the interior that recovery lasted hours, and the men who carried it out rarely spoke of it again. NASA had lost astronauts before in plane crashes on the highway. It had never lost them like this, strapped inside the machine that was supposed to carry the nation to the moon. The 3 men inside were not novices. Gus Grissom was one of the original Mercury 7, the second American ever to fly into space, and a veteran of Gemini besides. Ed White had already made history as the first American to walk in space, floating outside his capsule over the Pacific. Only Roger Chaffee was a rookie, 31 years old, still waiting for the first flight he would never take. NASA had placed 3 of its very best inside that capsule, precisely because the mission mattered so much. There's a bitter irony in Grissom being there at all. Years earlier, on his Mercury flight, his capsule had sunk in the ocean after its hatch blew open on its own, and some quietly blamed him, whispering that he had panicked and popped it himself. He spent years insisting the hatch had failed without him, and now here he was, killed by a different hatch, one that would not open when his life depended on it. The machine punished him twice in exactly opposite ways. The test that killed them was called a plugs-out test, meant to check whether the spacecraft could run on its own internal power. It was considered so routine, so free of danger, that it was not even classified as hazardous. No emergency crews stood ready. No fire trucks idled nearby. The pad was set up as though nothing could possibly go wrong, because on paper nothing could. There was no fuel in the rocket. The only danger anyone had planned for was the danger of flight, and this was merely a rehearsal. For the technicians on the gantry, the minutes that followed were a nightmare they carried the rest of their lives. They fought through blinding smoke and searing heat, certain the whole spacecraft might explode at any second, clawing at a hatch that would not give. When they finally forced it open, the fire had already smothered itself, and the cabin was silent. What they found inside they would seldom describe. The 3 were later buried with full honors, Grissom and Chafee at Arlington, White at West Point. 3 flag-draped coffins for a mission that never left the ground. The cruelty is that everyone had seen pieces of it coming. Grissom had grown so sick of the capsule's faults that he once hung a lemon on the simulator for the technicians to find. Engineers had flagged the wiring. The pure oxygen danger was written down in reports nobody acted on. Yet the schedule pulled everyone forward because a murdered president had promised the moon by the end of the decade, and a calendar does not grieve. To understand how 3 men ended up in that cabin, you have to go back further than most people expect, to another country and a far darker factory. There's a photograph from 1969 of a smiling man in a sharp suit watching the Saturn V climb off the pad. His name is Wernher von Braun, and America adores him. He is the genius who will carry them to the moon, a fixture on television, a collaborator with Walt Disney. 25 years earlier, that same man wore a different uniform and answered to Heinrich Himmler. The road to the lunar surface began in Nazi Germany, and NASA has spent decades trying not to say so too loudly. Von Braun was a rocket prodigy, obsessed with spaceflight since he was a boy staring at the planets. The trouble is that the only people willing to fund enormous rockets in the 1930s were building weapons. He took their money with little visible hesitation. He joined a Nazi party in 1937. He accepted a commission in the SS. His dream of reaching other worlds was financed by a regime that mainly wanted something heavy falling back down onto cities. The weapon they built was the Vengeance rocket, the first object of human make to touch the edge of space. It climbed 60 miles high, then fell faster than its own sound onto London and Antwerp, arriving before the air raid sirens could even warn anyone. Thousands of civilians died beneath a machine that was, in pure engineering terms, a marvel. The same pumps and guidance ideas would one day lift men toward the moon. Genius and atrocity, sketched on the same blueprint. Here is the part history tried to bury under all that charm. The rockets were assembled by prisoners inside a tunnel complex called Mittelwerk, carved into a mountain in central Germany. The laborers came from a concentration camp named Dora. They worked in the dark, breathing rock dust, starved and beaten, and hanged from cranes for the smallest suspicion of sabotage. More people died building the Vengeance rocket than were ever killed by it in war. Roughly 20,000 of them. Von Braun walked through that tunnel more than once. He would later claim the conditions sickened him, that he was a dreamer trapped inside a machine of horror with no way to climb out. Survivors remembered it differently. Some testified that he stood by while prisoners were abused, that he personally selected slave laborers from the camp for their skills. Where the truth sits between those accounts is something you will have to weigh yourself. What is not in dispute is that he saw it all, and he kept working. As the Reich collapsed in 1945, von Braun made a cold and clever calculation. He would surrender to the Americans rather than the Soviets, and he would bring his best minds and his blueprints along as the price of his freedom. He staged the whole surrender, gathering about 100 of his engineers, hiding documents in a mine shaft, and walking into United States custody. The Americans could barely believe their fortune. The man who built Hitler's terror weapon was offering to build them a future. The first Vengeance rocket fell on London on September 8, 1944, striking a quiet street in Chiswick and killing 3 people, among them a 3-year-old girl. There was no air raid warning because nothing could outrun the thing. It arrived faster than its own sound. So the explosion came first and the shriek of its descent second, for anyone left alive to hear it all. More than 3,000 of them would rain down on London and Antwerp before the war ended, a weapon against which there was simply no defense. Von Braun's own tangle with the regime was messier than his American admirers cared to admit. In 1944, the Gestapo actually arrested him, on suspicion that he cared more about spaceflight than about winning the war, and held him for 2 weeks. He was freed only because the rocket program could not run without him. So he was both a willing servant of the Reich and, briefly, its prisoner. a man who handed the Nazis their terror weapon and was nearly destroyed by them for dreaming too openly of the moon. The laundering of the past did not entirely hold. Decades later, in 1984, one of von Braun's closest colleagues, Arthur Rudolph, who had helped manage the very Saturn V that carried Apollo to the moon, quietly left the United States and renounced his citizenship. Investigators had tied him to the brutal treatment of slave laborers at Middlework. The man who ran production of the rocket that reached the moon had, in another life, run production in the Tunnel of the Dying. America had built its greatest triumph on hands it preferred never to examine. Von Braun himself never faced that reckoning. He died in 1977, celebrated and honored, hailed as the father of the American space program, having spent his final decades as a television star and a NASA director. Whether he was a monster, a cold opportunist, or a dreamer who made unforgivable bargains to chase the stars, is an argument that has never truly ended. What is certain is that the Saturn V, the most magnificent machine we ever built, traces its bloodline straight back to that mountain in Germany and to the thousands who died inside it. The program that carried them across the ocean had a name, Paperclip, taken from the little clips fastened to the files of scientists whose Nazi pasts were quietly rewritten. Officially, no committed Nazis were permitted. In practice, records were laundered, party memberships erased, and men who had stood in that tunnel were handed American homes, laboratories, and eventually the keys to the space program. The country that had just defeated fascism decided its rockets were worth the stain. The stain moved to Texas, then to Alabama, and got to work. On the night of October 4th, 1957, Americans wandered into their backyards, tilted their heads back, and searched the stars for a point of light that had no business being there. It was moving, steady, west to east, crossing the whole sky in a matter of minutes. Up there, 500 miles above the lawns and the porch lights, a polished metal ball was circling the entire planet once every 90-odd minutes. It belonged to the Soviet Union, and it felt, to everyone looking up, like it was watching. Sputnik was almost insulting in its simplicity. A sphere of aluminum alloy, 23 inches across, weighing about 180 pounds, for whip antennas trailing behind it. Inside was little more than batteries and 2 radio transmitters. No camera, no weapon, no real science to speak of. Its entire purpose was to go beep, and that beep, broadcast on frequencies any amateur radio operator could tune into, became the most frightening sound of the decade. Because everyone grasped the meaning underneath. A rocket strong enough to lift that sphere into orbit was a rocket strong enough to drop a nuclear warhead onto Chicago, and nothing in the American arsenal could stop it on the way down. The Soviets had not merely launched a satellite. They had announced, in polite little pulses, that the high ground of the entire planet now belonged to them. Schoolchildren practiced ducking under their desks. Their parents looked up and felt the sky press lower. The panic was total, and it was public. Newspapers printed the orbital schedule so citizens could step outside and watch the thing pass over, a nightly reminder of exactly who was ahead. Politicians demanded to know how the country that split the atom had been beaten into space by a nation they had been taught to picture as backward and poor. The wound even earned a name: the Sputnik Crisis. An entire superpower thrown into a spiral of doubt by a beeping ball the size of a medicine bag. A month later, it got worse. The Soviets launched Sputnik 2, far heavier, and this time it was not empty. Inside rode a small stray dog pulled off the streets of Moscow, named Laika. She became the first living creature to orbit the Earth, and she was never meant to come home. There was no re-entry plan, none at all. Laika died within hours from heat and terror, alone, inside a metal can moving 18,000 miles an hour. The Soviets let the world believe she had lasted for days. The truth surfaced only decades later. The man behind Sputnik was a ghost. The Soviets refused to name him, referring to him only as the chief designer, terrified that Western agents might assassinate their greatest asset. His real name was Sergei Korolev, and his story carries its own horror. In the 1930s, Stalin's purges had swept him into the Gulag, where he was tortured, lost most of his teeth, and nearly died in a Siberian labor camp. The man who launched humanity into space had first been broken by his own country. The rocket that carried Sputnik was built to do something far grimmer than exploration. Called the R-7, it was the world's first intercontinental ballistic missile, designed to hurl a hydrogen bomb clear across the planet. Launching a satellite was almost an afterthought, a way to test the missile and score a propaganda victory in the same stroke. And that same basic design, remarkably, still flies today, carrying crews to the space station. We reach the heavens on the bones of a doomsday weapon. In Washington, President Eisenhower tried to project calm, insisting Sputnik was just one small ball in the air and no cause for hysteria. The public would not believe him. A story took hold of a dangerous missile gap, a supposed Soviet lead in nuclear rockets that could wipe out American cities. The gap turned out to be mostly a myth, even a reversal in America's favor. But the fear was real, and it loosened enormous amounts of money. Nothing opens a nation's wallet like the belief that the enemy is winning. Sputnik itself did not last long. After 3 months of circling the Earth and unnerving an entire hemisphere, its orbit decayed, and in early 1958 it fell back into the atmosphere and burned away to nothing, having completed some 1,400 loops around the planet. Its beeping had already stopped weeks before when the batteries died. But the thing it set in motion could not be switched off. 2 superpowers were now locked into a race with no finish line except the sky itself. For the United States, the lesson of those 2 launches was unbearable. The enemy could reach space, could put a living heartbeat in orbit, and could presumably bring a warhead down wherever it pleased. Something had to change, and quickly. Out of that fear, in 1958, a new civilian agency was stitched together from a patchwork of existing laboratories and given one blunt mandate: to catch up. They called it the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. NASA was born from dread. Its true parent was never wonder. It was the fear of what now waited overhead. December 6, 1957, 2 months after Sputnik, the United States is finally ready to answer. The Vanguard rocket stands on the pad at Cape Canaveral with a tiny grapefruit-sized satellite bolted to the top, and the whole country is watching live on television. Ignition. The rocket rises about 4 feet into the air, hesitates, and settles back down into a slow, rolling ball of fire. The little satellite pops off the nose and tumbles into the scrub, still beeping, completely useless. The papers call it Kaputnik. The failure was worse than embarrassing. The Soviets offered, with theatrical sympathy, to send the United States the kind of foreign aid reserved for struggling nations. Behind closed doors, a quiet decision was finally made to unleash the one team most officials have been keeping at arm's length: von Braun and his German engineers, down in Huntsville, Alabama, had been begging for a chance for months. They already had a working rocket called the Redstone. They had been ready the entire time. On January 31st, 1958, von Braun's team launched Explorer 1, and this time it flew. The satellite reached orbit carrying a real instrument, a radiation counter built by a scientist named James Van Allen. It found something no one expected: enormous belts of trapped radiation wrapped around the Earth like invisible rings. America had reached space at last, and immediately discovered that the space just above our heads was far more hostile than anyone had imagined. Those belts still shape how every crewed mission is flown to this day. With orbit finally in hand, all attention swung to the true prize, a living human being. The new program was called Mercury, and its goal was blunt to the edge of madness. Put a man inside a capsule, throw him into space on a converted weapon, and bring him back breathing. The missiles in question, the Atlas and the Redstone, had a stubborn habit of exploding during tests. Engineers watched their own rockets cartwheel and burst into flame, then went back to their desks and calmly discussed bolting a person onto the next one. Before any human climbed aboard, the capsule was tested with passengers who had never volunteered. Chimpanzees. A chimp named Ham was trained with banana pellets and electric shocks to pull levers on cue, then launched in early 1961 on a flight that went wrong in several ways at once. His capsule flew higher and faster than planned, crushed him with far more force than intended, and splashed down miles off course, slowly taking on water while it waited to be found. Ham lived. The photographs of him afterward show a creature who looks, quite understandably, furious. The grapefruit satellite that survived the Vanguard explosion is a small, strange relic. Thrown clear of the fireball, somehow still beeping, it was found in the scrub, and it survives to this day, on display in the Smithsonian, a monument to national embarrassment. The Soviets twisted the knife at the United Nations, publicly offering America the kind of technical assistance reserved for struggling nations. For a country that saw itself as the summit of modern science, no insult cut deeper than pity. Explorer 1 kept transmitting for months and stayed in orbit for 12 years before finally falling in 1970. Its discovery of the radiation belts, named for James Van Allen, was the first real scientific harvest of the space age. It also carried a warning. The region just above the atmosphere was flooded with charged particles fierce enough to threaten electronics and living cells. Every astronaut who would later fly to the moon had to be threaded carefully through gaps in that invisible, lethal cloud. The Mercury 7 had been chosen from more than 500 military test pilots, put through medical and psychological screening so invasive that many candidates considered it an ordeal in its own right. Ice water pumped into their ears, endless enemas, isolation chambers meant to find the breaking point of men who prided themselves on having none. What NASA wanted was not merely courage. It wanted human beings who would stay calm and functional while strapped to a bomb, and who would not crack under the loneliest pressure imaginable. Ham was not the last animal to fly before a human did. A few months after his rough ride, another chimpanzee named Enos was launched all the way into orbit, circling the Earth twice before John Glenn ever managed it. Enos suffered malfunctions of his own, including a wiring fault that shocked him again and again, even when he performed his tasks correctly. He kept pulling the levers anyway. When people speak of the right stuff, they rarely mention that some of the first passengers to prove the machines could work were primates who never volunteered for a thing. There is something worth sitting with in those frantic early years. The astronauts and the animals were riding hardware that failed on a regular basis, built against a deadline set by fear, tested in public where every explosion became a national wound. The engineers were brilliant and the courage was genuine. Still, the whole enterprise ran on a kind of controlled desperation, a willingness to gamble living bodies against the clock. That willingness would define NASA for decades, and the men lining up to take that gamble were about to become the most famous people in America. In April 1959, NASA lined up 7 men in matching silver suits and presented them to the world as the Mercury 7. Test pilots, every one, pulled from the military. Alan Shepard, John Glenn, Gus Grissom, and 4 others. The press treated them as demigods before a single one had left the ground. Their wives landed magazine covers. And yet the vehicle these supposed pilots were meant to fly was something they privately resented, because in the original design it barely allowed them to fly at all. The capsule was tiny, roughly the size of the front seat of a car, and the astronaut lay flat on his back facing a wall of switches. Early plans ran the entire flight automatically or from the ground, with the man inside reduced to biological cargo. The pilots despised the idea. Chuck Yeager, the greatest test pilot alive, mocked them in public, sneering that the occupant would just be spam in a can. Stung to the core, the 7 fought hard for a window from manual controls, for the simple dignity of steering the thing that might kill them. On May 5, 1961, Alan Shepard became the first American in space. His flight lasted 15 minutes and never reached orbit, a suborbital arc straight up and back down. Held on the pad by delay after delay, He ran into a problem the engineers had somehow never planned for. He needed to urinate, and there was nowhere for it to go. Eventually, they let him relieve himself right there in the suit, shorting out several of his medical sensors. The first American in space lay in a warm puddle, waiting for a rocket that might explode. Heroism is rarely as clean as the posters. Shepard's hop was a triumph, and still the Soviets had beaten him. 3 weeks earlier, Yuri Gagarin had circled the entire planet, the first human being ever to do so. America was again a step behind, always chasing. What the country needed was a full orbital flight of its own, and that weight fell onto a devout and disciplined Marine named John Glenn. In February 1962, he folded himself into a capsule he had named Friendship 7 and rode an Atlas rocket, the exploding kind, into orbit at last. Glenn circled the Earth 3 times, and midway through, a warning light blinked on a console back in Mission Control. It suggested the heat shield, the single thing standing between Glenn and incineration during re-entry, had come loose. If it fell away, he would burn alive on the way down, and controllers would be able to do nothing but listen to it happen. They made a desperate, improvised call, telling him to keep a spent rocket pack strapped on to pin the shield in place. Glenn came down inside a fireball, chunks of flaming debris streaking past his window, unsure if any one of them was the shield itself. Yuri Gagarin's flight, the one that beat Shepard by 3 weeks, hid a secret of its own. The Soviet capsule had no way to land its passenger gently, so Gagarin was ejected from it 4 miles up and parachuted down on his own, coming to Earth in a field where a startled farmer and her granddaughter watched a man in an orange suit descend from the sky. The Soviets concealed this for years because the rules for an official record required the pilot to land inside his craft. The first human in space technically fell to Earth separately from his ship. When Shepard finally sat atop his rocket, pinned down by delay after delay, his patience gave out in a famous burst. Over the radio, he snapped at the engineers to stop their fussing and light this candle. It was the voice of a test pilot who would rather risk death than sit 1 more minute being managed. That impatience defined the breed. These were men who had spent whole careers flying experimental jets that killed their friends, and who trusted their own hands far more than any automatic system a committee had dreamed up. There's a story rarely told about those years. A group of accomplished women pilots, later called the Mercury 13, quietly passed many of the same brutal physical tests as the male astronauts, and in some cases scored better. One of them endured the sensory isolation tank longer than any man had, and then the door was simply shut. NASA required astronauts to be military jet test pilots, a path closed to women at the time, and the program was killed before it began. It will be 20 more years before an American woman reached space. John Glenn's own story had a strange final chapter. In 1998, at the age of 77, the same man who had orbited in a cramped Mercury capsule flew again, this time aboard the space shuttle, becoming the oldest human ever to reach space. He had gone from riding a converted missile held together with hand-soldered wiring to flying a reusable spaceplane, all within a single lifetime. Few people ever get to bookend an entire era with their own body. Fewer still survive both ends of it. The shield held. The warning light had been false. Glenn splashed down alive and became, within a day, the most beloved man in the country. But peel away the ticker tape and look at what these flights actually were. Men sealed inside cramped metal shells, riding missiles designed to carry bombs, kept alive by hand-soldered circuits and split-second decisions made against the clock. They flew anyway, fully aware of the odds. The astonishing part is that a president was about to raise those odds enormously by aiming the entire country at a target 250,000 miles away. September 12, 1962. A hot morning inside a football stadium at Rice University in Houston. President John F. Kennedy stands at a podium and tells a sweating crowd that America will go to the moon before this decade is out. They will choose it, he says, precisely because it is hard. It is a gorgeous line, It is also, in that moment, a promise backed by almost nothing. NASA has barely kept a man in orbit for a full day. The moon sits 250,000 miles away, and the clock has just started to run. Kennedy's motives were not romantic in the least. A year earlier, the Bay of Pigs had humiliated him, and Gagarin had beaten America into orbit. He needed an arena where the United States could visibly, unarguably win, and space was it. He pressed his advisors for something, anything the Soviets could not do first. The moon came back as the answer, chosen for the sheer size of the challenge. In private, Kennedy admitted he was not all that interested in space itself. He was interested in beating the Russians, and the moon was simply the scoreboard. To reach it, NASA had to learn things no one had ever done. How to keep men alive in space for 2 full weeks. How to make 2 spacecraft find each other and dock in orbit. How to open the hatch and survive out in the vacuum. That schooling came in a program called Gemini, 2 seats, flown hard and fast across 1965 and 1966. It was dangerous, unglamorous, relentless work. And it is where the real price of the moon began to reveal itself. In June 1965, Ed White, the same man who would later die in the Apollo 1 fire, opened his hatch and floated out into the void, the first American to walk in space. He was so overwhelmed by the sight of it, the Earth turning enormous and blue beneath his boots, that he did not want to come back. Ground control ordered him inside again and again. He called climbing back into that capsule the saddest moment of his life. 2 years later, he would be gone. For one afternoon, he was the freest human being who had ever lived. Not every spacewalk was a joy. When Gene Cernan went outside on Gemini 9, the work very nearly killed him. With no handholds and no true practice in weightlessness, every motion he made sent him tumbling. His heart rate climbed toward 180. His visor fogged completely with sweat until he was effectively blind, dragging himself back to the hatch by feel, half-cooked inside a suit that could not shed his own body heat. He made it in by inches. NASA quietly understood, then, that it had badly underestimated how vicious space really was. Kennedy never lived to see any of it. In November 1963, little more than a year after the stadium speech, he was murdered in Dallas, and the moon program became a memorial as much as a mission. To cancel it now would be to betray a dead president who had staked the national honor on it. His successor, Lyndon Johnson, a longtime believer in space, poured money into the effort. The moon deadline was no longer only a challenge. It had become a promise made to a ghost. Before anyone could land on the moon, NASA had to solve a terrifying puzzle. 2 spacecraft, each moving at 17,000 miles an hour, had to find each other in the emptiness of orbit and gently join together because the entire lunar landing plan depended on it. In late 1965, Gemini 6 and Gemini 7 pulled it off, flying within a foot of one another, close enough for the crews to hold handwritten signs up to their windows. It looked almost casual. It was one of the hardest things anyone had ever done. That same mission, Gemini 7, was an endurance ordeal bordering on the grotesque. Frank Borman and Jim Lovell spent 14 days crammed into a cabin the size of the front of a small car, unable to stand, unable to truly wash, breathing their own stale air, wearing the same suits so long that peeling them off became a minor medical event. 2 weeks of that, purely to prove the human body could survive a trip to the moon and back. They came home pale, wobbling, and reeking, having shown it could just barely be endured. Those 2 men, Borman and Lovell, sealed together through that miserable fortnight, would go on to define what came next. Borman would command Apollo 8, the first flight to the moon. Lovell would fly there twice and command the doomed Apollo 13. The unglamorous grind of Gemini was quietly assembling the exact crews who would carry the whole enterprise to its heights and through its worst disaster. The training ground was choosing its heroes and its survivors, without any of them yet knowing which they would turn out to be. Then came Gemini 8, and a quiet civilian pilot named Neil Armstrong. Just after the first successful docking in orbit, the linked spacecraft began to spin faster and faster, a stuck thruster firing and refusing to stop. Armstrong and his crewmate were tumbling roughly once a second, right on the edge of blacking out, their vision graying at the corners. With only seconds left before they lost consciousness, Armstrong undocked and fired the re-entry thrusters to kill the spin, saving both their lives. The man who held his nerve in that cabin would, 3 years later, be chosen to walk on the moon. The fire had been out for hours, and the question hanging over Cape Kennedy was simple and brutal. Should the program continue at all? 3 astronauts were dead inside a spacecraft that had never even left the ground. The moon deadline suddenly looked like a death sentence signed by a murdered president. In Washington, congressmen wanted names. In Houston, engineers who had approved that capsule went home and lay awake. And somebody was going to have to decide whether to keep flying men on top of these machines. A review board took the burned capsule apart, piece by piece, and what they found was damning. Miles of wiring with cracked insulation, flammable material packed into every corner, plumbing that leaked corrosive coolant, a hatch that needed at least 90 seconds to open on a good day and could not be opened at all against the pressure inside. The report ran to thousands of pages, and its verdict was quietly savage. The astronauts had been sealed inside a fire trap, and the warnings had been sitting in writing for anyone willing to read them. One moment from the hearings became infamous. The astronaut Frank Borman, testifying before Congress, was asked what had gone so catastrophically wrong. His answer was 3 words: a failure of imagination. Nobody had pictured a fire on the ground during a routine test with the hatch bolted shut. They had prepared for 1,000 dangers waiting in space and overlooked the simplest one on Earth. That phrase would haunt the agency for the rest of its history. It would return, almost word for word, decades later, over 2 more dead crews. Instead of canceling Apollo, NASA rebuilt it from the inside out. The engineers redesigned the capsule almost completely. They swapped the pure oxygen ground atmosphere for a safer mixture. They tore out the flammable materials, and they fitted a new hatch that a single exhausted man could swing open outward in about 3 seconds. Every one of those fixes was paid for by the lives of Grissom, White, and Chafee. Every astronaut who flew afterward owed a quiet debt to 3 men who burned in order to make the machine honest. There is a small and aching detail worth carrying. Gus Grissom, before the fire, had spoken with a strange calm about the danger. He said that if they died, people should simply accept it because the conquest of space was worth the risk of a life, and the program should not be delayed by it. He got his wish in the worst way imaginable. The 3 names were added to a lengthening list, and NASA pushed on toward the moon, more careful now, more frightened, and completely committed. One figure in the aftermath deserves to be remembered. Thomas Barron, an inspector at the contractor building the capsule, had compiled a scathing report alleging sloppy work and safety failures long before the fire ever happened. Afterward, he testified before Congress about what he had seen. Days after that testimony, Barron's car was struck by a train at a crossing, killing him and his family, and his 500-page report vanished from the record. Investigators ruled it an accident. Not everyone who studied the case was ever entirely satisfied. The company that built the capsule, North American Aviation, absorbed much of the blame, though NASA had signed off on every dangerous choice along the way. The relationship between the agency and its contractors was exposed as too cozy, too hurried, too willing to look past defects to protect the schedule. It was the first public glimpse of a pattern that would return decades later with the shuttle. When the pressure to fly on time collides with the quiet warnings of the people building the machine, the schedule tends to win, until it kills someone. It took 21 months before NASA dared to fly a crew again. In October 1968, Apollo 7 finally carried 3 men safely into Earth orbit, testing the redesigned capsule that had been bought with blood. The commander, Wally Schirra, ran the mission like a man who had buried friends and would take no chances, clashing constantly with the ground, catching a miserable head cold in space, and generally making everyone's life difficult. He was prickly on purpose. He had decided that no schedule, no manager, and no television broadcast was worth another burned crew. On the moon today, there lies a small aluminum figure, half buried in the dust, left by a later crew. It is called the Fallen Astronaut, placed beside a plaque listing the names of astronauts and cosmonauts who had died reaching for space, both American and Soviet. Grissom, White, and Chaffee are on that list. It is the only piece of art on another world, a tiny memorial in a place no mourner will ever visit again. The men who fell to make the journey possible are honored in the one spot their deaths helped us reach. 18 months after the fire, NASA was ready to gamble again, and this time bigger than ever. Not a cautious step, the boldest leap it could imagine. They would take 3 men, strap them to the largest rocket ever built, and send them all the way to the moon to orbit it before anyone had even flown the landing craft. To do it, those men would have to pass around the far side, where the Earth itself would drop out of the sky, and no radio signal on Earth could reach them. Christmas Eve, 1968. 3 men are falling toward the moon at more than 5,000 miles an hour. In a few moments, they're going to vanish. Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders are about to pass behind the far side, into the radio shadow where the bulk of the moon blocks every signal from Earth. Mission Control counts down to loss of contact. Then the line goes dead, precisely on schedule, and a room full of people in Houston sits in silence, waiting to learn whether the engine burn on the far side worked or whether it killed them. Apollo 8 was a wild, half-reckless bet. The lunar landing module was not ready in time, so NASA rewrote the plan at the last minute. They would send men all the way to the moon and back with no lander at all, purely to prove it could be done before the year expired. It was the first time humans would ride the giant Saturn V, which had flown only twice, both times without a crew, and once with serious trouble. Bolting astronauts to it this early was, by any sober measure, an act of faith. Behind the moon, sealed off from Earth, the crew fired their engine to slow down and slip into orbit. Burn too long, and they would smash into the surface. Burn too short, and they would slingshot off into deep space with no way back. It worked. When they swung back around the near side and the radio crackled awake, Lovell's voice came out of the silence, and Houston finally exhaled. They were circling another world, the first humans ever to arrive. And then they happened to glance out the window. On the 4th orbit, Bill Anders was photographing the gray, dead ground sliding by below when something rose over the lunar horizon. The Earth, blue and white and impossibly delicate, hanging in total black, small enough to hide behind a raised thumb. Anders grabbed for color film and captured the image we now call Earthrise. It was the first time our species had seen its whole home at once. One fragile marble adrift in nothing. Everyone who had ever lived, every war and love and empire, all of it resting on that single small point of light. That evening, in orbit around the moon, the crew did something no one saw coming. They read aloud, to the largest television audience the world had ever gathered, the opening verses of the book of Genesis. In the beginning, millions of people on the fragile blue planet below listened to human voices drifting down from the moon on Christmas Eve in the middle of a brutal year of assassinations and war. For a few minutes, the whole world went quiet and looked at itself. Then the crew had to light the engine one last time, behind the moon again, to start the long fall home. The wife of the commander, Susan Borman, was privately certain her husband was going to die. She had asked a NASA official, point blank, to tell her the real odds of Apollo 8 coming home, and the honest answer she received was around 50-50. So while the world watched with wonder, she quietly began planning his funeral, going through the motions of hosting the press while bracing to become a widow. Behind every serene mission broadcast was a family doing that same brutal arithmetic at the kitchen table. The year that Apollo 8 flew, 1968, had been one of the darkest in modern American memory. Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy had both been assassinated. Cities had burned. The war in Vietnam ground on with its mounting dead. The country felt as though it were coming apart at the seams. And then, on Christmas Eve, 3 men read from Genesis while circling the moon, and for a moment a fractured nation looked up together. A stranger later sent the crew a telegram carrying only 5 words. "Thank you. You saved 1968." The Genesis reading did not please everyone. A prominent atheist activist, Madeleine Murray O'Hair, sued the government, arguing that astronauts reading scripture on a taxpayer-funded broadcast violated the separation of church and state. The case went nowhere, but it revealed how enormous the moment had truly been. Even a reading from an ancient book, delivered from lunar orbit, was powerful enough to spark a fight over the soul of a nation. Space had become a stage on which every human argument was suddenly amplified and beamed back home. As Apollo 8 swung out from behind the moon on its way home, its engine having fired flawlessly, Jim Lovell radioed a small joke back to a waiting world. "Please be informed," he said, "there's a Santa Claus." It was Christmas morning, and 3 men had become the first humans in history to fall back toward Earth from another world. They had proven the journey was survivable. Now the only thing left to attempt was the one thing everyone had actually promised: to stop circling and to land. Apollo 8 shifted something in the human mind that never shifted back. People who saw Earthrise describe a strange vertigo, a sudden grasp of how small and exposed we are, alone in the dark with no railing and no net. Part of the environmental movement traces its birth to that one photograph. We had gone hunting for the moon and instead discovered the Earth, and how terribly alone it looks from far away. But the mission had only circled. The real question, the one Kennedy had actually posed, was still waiting. Could a human being stand on that surface, walk on it, and come home? There is a speech almost no one has ever heard, written in July 1969 and locked in a drawer, meant to be read only if the mission ended in the worst way. It opens like this: "Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace." It was written for Richard Nixon, to deliver to a watching world if Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon and then could not leave it. The plan in that case was chilling. Communications would be cut, a clergyman would commend their souls, and 2 men would be left to die on the surface while the world looked on. That speech existed because the odds of the landing were genuinely uncertain. The lunar module was a spidery, fragile craft with walls thin enough to push a pencil through, flying a maneuver no one had ever attempted with lives aboard. Its ascent engine, the single motor that had to fire to lift the men off the moon, carried no backup at all. If it failed to light, there was no rescue and no way home. Armstrong himself privately put the chance of a successful landing at around 50-50, a coin flip for the most watched journey ever attempted. On July 20th, 1969, Armstrong and Aldrin undocked the lunar module and began their descent. Almost at once, alarms started sounding. A computer warning, code 1202, then 1201, numbers nobody in the cabin fully recognized. The guidance computer was overloading, its tiny memory drowning in incoming data. Back in Houston, a 26-year-old controller had to decide, in a matter of seconds, whether those alarms were fatal. He remembered a training case, made the call, and said the words. "We're go on that alarm." They kept falling toward the moon. Then came a second crisis. As they neared the surface, Armstrong looked out and realized the computer was steering them straight into a crater littered with boulders the size of automobiles. He seized manual control, something the planners had barely rehearsed, and flew the lander sideways across the lunar landscape, hunting for a clear patch of ground, burning fuel he could not spare. In Houston, they watched the fuel gauge fall and fall. 60 seconds of fuel left. 30 seconds. The whole room stopped breathing. With roughly 17 seconds of fuel remaining, a light flickered on the panel, contact, and the engine shut down. Armstrong's voice traveled 250,000 miles across space, steady as a man reading off a grocery list. The Eagle has landed. In mission control, men who had held themselves together for the entire descent nearly came undone. They had done it by a margin thinner than anyone would admit out loud for years. Two humans were standing on another world, and the speech about their deaths went quietly back into its drawer, unread. Before stepping out, Buzz Aldrin did something quietly astonishing. Alone in the lander on the surface of the moon, he took out a small communion kit given to him by his church, poured wine into a tiny chalice, and took communion, the first food and drink ever consumed on another world. He did it in near silence, partly because of the lawsuit still hanging over the Genesis reading. The first meal on the moon was a sip of wine and a wafer, taken by a man alone, giving thanks in the stillness of a sea of tranquility. There was a moment on the surface that nearly stranded them. Moving around the cramped cabin in their bulky suits, one of the astronauts accidentally snapped off a circuit breaker, the very switch that armed the engine needed to lift them off the moon. For while it looked as if they had broken their only way home, Aldrin solved it with almost comic simplicity. He jammed a felt tip pen into the opening where the switch had been, completed the circuit by hand, and it worked. 2 lives and a nation's triumph, saved by a marker pen. While Armstrong and Aldrin walked below, a third man circled overhead alone. Michael Collins orbited the moon in the command module, and every time his path carried him around the far side, he lost all contact with Earth and with his crewmates, becoming, for those minutes, the most isolated human being who had ever lived. He wrote about it later without a trace of self-pity, describing an odd contentment in that perfect solitude. If account were taken, he mused, the tally would read 3 billion people on one side, plus 2 on the moon, and 1 alone on the other side of it. When the crew finally came home, they were treated as heroes and, briefly, as possible hazards. Fearing they might have carried back unknown lunar microbes, NASA sealed the 3 men inside a quarantine trailer for weeks, peering at them through a window, watching for any sign of some alien plague. There was, of course, nothing, but the caution captured the strangeness of the moment. We had touched another world, and we genuinely did not yet know whether it might have touched us back with something we could not survive. Hours later, Armstrong climbed down the ladder and spoke the line the whole species would remember about 1 small step. But the detail that lingers is how narrowly it all went the other way. 17 seconds of fuel, a computer that nearly triggered an abort, an engine with no backup that simply had to fire to bring them home. We remember Apollo 11 as a clean victory, a flag and a footprint in gray dust. It was closer to a near disaster, survived by nerve and luck in a handful of seconds. And the men who returned from those first journeys came back altered in ways nobody had thought to prepare for. Only 12 human beings have ever walked on the moon, and every one of them came home to a world that suddenly felt too small. Some never adjusted. Buzz Aldrin, the second man to stand on the surface, returned to Earth and sank into a deep depression and alcoholism, unable to find any purpose that could follow walking on another world. He wrote about it later with painful honesty. What do you do with the rest of your life once you have already done the thing? For several of the moonwalkers, the honest answer was that they quietly came apart. Others turned towards something like religion. Jim Irwin, who walked on the moon during Apollo 15, said he felt the actual presence of God on the surface, and he came home to become an evangelical preacher, later leading expeditions to hunt for Noah's Ark on a Turkish mountain. He said the moon had made his faith unshakable. For Irwin, the silence up there was not empty. It was crowded with something he would spend the rest of his life trying to describe to people who had never left the ground. Then there is Edgar Mitchell of Apollo 14. On the long coast back to Earth, gazing out at the little blue planet, he was seized by a sensation he could barely put into language, a sudden, overwhelming sense of connection and unity that felt almost mystical. He spent the rest of his life studying consciousness and the paranormal, certain that mainstream science was missing something enormous. He had even run quiet private telepathy experiments during the mission itself, without telling NASA. The moon had launched a hard nose test pilot and returned a mystic. Psychologists eventually gave the phenomenon a name: the overview effect, the deep shift in awareness reported by people who see the Earth from space, the borders dissolving, the fragility becoming almost unbearable, a sense that everything below is a single thing and terribly alone. Astronauts describe weeping without knowing why, or feeling a fierce protectiveness toward a planet that suddenly looked like one living cell in an endless black ocean. It is among the few genuinely reliable results of spaceflight. Go high enough, look back, and something inside you rearranges itself. There is a darker edge to it, one people mention far less often. Along with the wonder comes the dread. To see the Earth as a tiny, unguarded speck is also to understand, deep in your body, how easily all of it could simply be gone. No fence around it, no higher authority keeping watch. Only a thin film of air and water, holding everything we have ever been, drifting through a void that is overwhelmingly cold and empty and completely indifferent to us. Some astronauts carried that knowledge home like a stone they could never put down. Some carried the strangeness more lightly. Alan Shepard, the first American in space, walked on the moon during Apollo 14 and had smuggled aboard the head of a golf club, fixing it to a sample tool. Standing there in the low gravity, he swung one-handed and knocked 2 golf balls across the lunar surface, joking that they sailed for miles and miles. It was a very human thing to do, a moment of play in the deadliest environment imaginable. Even on the moon, we brought our games with us. Others left pieces of home behind. Charlie Duke, who walked on the moon during Apollo 16, set a photograph of his family on the surface, his wife and 2 young sons, and photographed it lying in the gray dust. It is still there, though the harsh radiation has almost certainly bleached the picture to blank white by now. A family portrait, faded to nothing, resting on another world. Of all the things we left up there, that small gesture may be the most quietly heartbreaking of them all. Buzz Aldrin's burden had roots running deep. His own mother, remarkably, had the maiden name Moon, and she had taken her own life the year before her son flew to the world that shared her name. His grandfather had died the same way. Aldrin would later speak with rare honesty about his struggles with depression and drinking, breaking a silence that astronauts were expected to keep. He helped turn the changed men of Apollo from unreachable icons into something more honest and more human. People who had been to heaven and still had to live down here. The wonder curdled, for some, into ordinary human failing. The crew of Apollo 15 carried hundreds of unauthorized postage envelopes to the moon, planning to sell them for profit once they were home. And when NASA found out, the resulting scandal quietly ended their careers. It was a small, grubby thing, set against the grandeur where they had stood. And maybe that is the most human detail of all. You can send a man 250,000 miles, let him stand upon another world, and underneath he is still exactly the flawed creature who left. There's a real question tangled up in all of this. Human beings did not evolve to see their entire world shrunk to a marble. We are made for horizons, for solid ground, for the comforting lie that the Earth is vast and steady and without end. The moonwalkers shattered that lie inside themselves, permanently, and most of them struggled with whatever moved in to replace it. They had traveled somewhere no words can truly carry another person. And coming home had always been the dangerous part, as one crew was about to discover 200,000 miles out when their spacecraft turned on them. April 13th, 1970. 55 hours into the flight to the moon, the astronaut Jack Swigert flips a switch to stir the oxygen tanks, a routine bit of housekeeping done a dozen times already. There's a bang. The whole spacecraft shudders. Warning lights bloom across the panel, and a caution alarm begins to wail. Swigert keys his microphone and speaks the line that will outlive him. "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. 200,000 miles from Earth. Something has just gone badly wrong, and nobody yet understands how bad." An oxygen tank had exploded. The blast ripped open the side of the service module, crippled the power supply, and started venting the crew's air into space in a ghostly plume that Lovell could see drifting past his window. The command module, their home, and their only ride back to Earth, was dying. Its oxygen, its water, its electricity, all bleeding away into the dark. Within hours, the crew had to abandon it and crawl into the lunar module, the flimsy landing craft, and use it as a lifeboat it was never built to be. The moon landing was finished. The only mission left was staying alive. The lunar module was designed to keep 2 men breathing for 2 days on the moon. Now it had to keep 3 men breathing for 4 days across open space. They powered down nearly everything to spare the batteries, and the temperature inside slid toward freezing. Water beaded on the cold walls and the dead instrument panels. The men, exhausted and dehydrated, wrapped themselves in whatever they could find and shivered in the gloom, rationing tiny sips of water, watching their own breath fog inside a spacecraft coasting in silence around the back of the moon. Then a new killer crept in: carbon dioxide. 3 men exhaling inside a cabin built for 2 were slowly poisoning their own air, and the level climbed toward the point where it kills. The scrubbing canisters that should have cleaned it were the wrong shape to fit the lunar module's fittings. Square filters, round sockets. On the ground, engineers dumped onto a table exactly the objects the crew had on hand: plastic bags, cardboard, tape, a sock, and raced to invent a fix that could be built in orbit out of garbage. They read the steps up over the radio. It held. The carbon dioxide came down. The last ordeal was simply getting home. The crew had to fire the lunar module's small engine to whip around the moon and line up for Earth, navigating by hand, steering off the line of the horizon and the sun because the guidance system was shut down cold. One burn was flown by feel, Lovell holding the craft steady while the others counted the seconds allowed. Any real error, and they would miss the Earth entirely, either skipping off the atmosphere into an endless orbit or diving in too steep and burning to nothing. There was no margin at all, and they were doing it in a frozen lifeboat. The superstitious had plenty to chew on. It was Apollo 13. It launched at 13 minutes past the 13th hour, and the accident struck on April the 13th. NASA, a place run by engineers, publicly scoffed at the notion that a number could matter. And yet the coincidences stacked up so neatly that even hardened flight controllers admitted a private shiver. The mission that nearly became the agency's second fatal disaster wore the unluckiest number in the culture, stamped across it at every turn. The crew had changed at the last minute. The original pilot, Ken Mattingly, was pulled from the flight just days before launch because he had been exposed to German measles and might fall ill in space. He was replaced by Jack Swigert. Mattingly never got sick, and in a strange twist, being left on the ground made him essential, because when the spacecraft was dying, it was Mattingly who sat in a simulator for hours, working out how to bring the frozen ship back to life without killing everyone aboard. The man bumped from the mission helped save it. The explosion was not truly bad luck. The oxygen tank that Blue had been dropped during handling years earlier, subtly damaged, then subjected to a chain of testing errors that quietly cooked its internal wiring. The flaw sat there, hidden, through the entire first half of the flight, waiting for the routine stir that would spark it. Like the fire before it, like the disaster still to come, the seeds of catastrophe had been planted long in advance, in small oversights nobody believed would matter. Space does not forgive small oversights. Jack Swigert, the man who spoke those famous words, met a quiet and cruel end. Years after surviving a dying spacecraft 200,000 miles from Earth, he ran for Congress and won. But before he could ever take his seat, he was killed by cancer, dead at 51. He had been hauled back from the lip of the void by the ingenuity of hundreds of people, only to be taken, in the end, by something ordinary and human. The universe had tried and failed to kill him. Biology simply waited its turn. On April 17th, the crew crawled back into the cold, dead command module for re-entry, and the world held its breath through the long radio blackout as the capsule tore into the atmosphere. The expected silence stretched on and on longer than it should have. Then 3 white parachutes ballooned over the Pacific, and Apollo 13 was home. NASA called it a successful failure. 3 men had been hauled back from the lip of the void by improvisation and raw nerve. But the near miss carried a warning the agency did not want to hear. Space would keep trying to kill them, and one day the luck would finally run out. December 14th, 1972. A man named Gene Cernan climbs a ladder on the surface of the moon, pauses, and looks down at his own final footprint pressed into the gray dust. He says a few quiet words about coming back one day, with peace and hope for all mankind. Then he pulls himself into the lander and lifts off. That was more than 50 years ago. No human being has stood on the moon since. We went 6 times, and then we stopped, and we simply never returned. It is one of the strangest facts in the entire story. At the very moment humanity finally mastered the moon, it turned around and walked away. The later missions, Apollo 18, 19, and 20, were already planned and their rockets partly built. All 3 were canceled to save money. The public had grown bored. Landing on the moon, the impossible dream of every generation that came before, had become routine television that the networks barely troubled to broadcast. The same country that had wept over Apollo 11 was changing the channel by Apollo 17. The reasons were painfully ordinary. The war in Vietnam was swallowing the budget. Cities were seething with unrest. Voters asked why billions were being poured into moon rocks while there were desperate problems at home. And it was a fair thing to ask. Kennedy's real goal had been to beat the Soviets, and that was accomplished. Once the race was won, the will to keep going evaporated almost overnight. For the people holding the money, space had never truly been about wonder. It was about winning, and the winning was over. What became of the leftover hardware is its own quiet tragedy. Fully assembled Saturn V rockets, the most powerful machines humanity had ever built, capable of flinging men to the moon, were laid on their sides and turned into lawn ornaments. You can walk up to one today in Houston or Florida, stretched out in the grass, birds nesting in the giant engine bells. Flight-ready spacecraft became museum displays. The factories were shut, the tooling scrapped, the blueprints boxed and shelved. In a very real sense, we forgot how to build them. That last part deserves a moment. The knowledge of how to fly to the moon was never held in a single book. It lived in the hands and minds of hundreds of thousands of engineers and technicians, in tooling and habits and hard-won experience. When the program ended, all those people scattered. They retired, they died, they drifted into other work. Going back today is genuinely hard because the how of it was allowed to rot. We never lost the science. We lost the craft, the muscle memory of a civilization that once did the impossible against a deadline. Apollo 17 carried the only trained scientist ever to walk on the moon, a geologist named Harrison Schmitt. Every earlier moonwalker had been a pilot first. Schmitt actually understood the rocks he was gathering, and it was he who spotted something that made both men stop cold, a patch of bright orange soil scattered across the gray. For a heartbeat, it looked almost alive. It turned out to be tiny beads of volcanic glass, 3 billion years old, evidence of ancient fire fountains on a world we tend to think of as dead. Each landing site was marked with a plaque bolted to the lander's leg, left behind when the men flew home. The one from Apollo 11 reads that they came in peace for all mankind. Those plaques are still up there, along with the flags, the abandoned rovers, the discarded tools, and the lower halves of 6 landers. An entire small museum of human presence, scattered across the lunar surface, visited by no one, dusted by nothing, waiting in a silence that has now lasted longer than most of the people listening have been alive. For a while, NASA kept a foothold in space with Skylab, a makeshift station cobbled together from leftover Apollo hardware, where crews lived for months studying how the human body copes with the void. Even that was eventually let go, left to decay, and finally to fall from orbit in 1979, scattering debris across the Australian outback. After that, for decades, No human traveled beyond low Earth orbit at all. We had touched another world, and then retreated to circling a few hundred miles up, going in loops, waiting for a reason to leave again. Only now, half a century later, is NASA seriously trying to go back through a program called Artemis, named for the twin sister of Apollo. But it has been slow and troubled and staggeringly expensive precisely because so much of the old knowledge had to be painfully relearned. A civilization that once flew to the moon on slide rules and typewriters now struggles, with all its computers, to repeat the feat. That gap says something uncomfortable about progress. It is not a straight line climbing forever upward. It can stall. It can even run backward. A quiet melancholy hangs over the end of Apollo, and it is not really about rockets. For a handful of short years, human beings did something that looked like the beginning of a permanent age, a species stepping off its own world for good. And then it closed. The footprints are still up there, perfectly held in the airless dust exactly as the astronauts left them, and they will stay that way for millions of years. Monuments to a moment we reached and then let slip through our fingers. But NASA still had to fly and to justify itself, so it built a new machine and promised it would make space ordinary and safe. That promise would break in front of the whole world. Here is something that should keep engineers awake at night. Nearly every major disaster NASA suffered was predicted in writing by its own people before it happened. Not vaguely, specifically. The exact failure, named in a memo, then waved away by someone higher up the chain. There's a phrase for how this happens, coined by a sociologist named Diane Vaughn, who spent years studying the agency. The normalization of deviance. It describes how an organization slowly, quietly learns to accept things it once knew were dangerous, until the danger simply feels like business as usual. The space shuttle was born compromised. NASA wanted a fully reusable spaceplane. Congress refused to pay for it, so the design was cut down to fit the money, and out came a strange hybrid, a winged orbiter bolted to a giant external fuel tank, and two solid rocket boosters packed with what amounted to explosive. It was sold to the public and a Congress on wildly optimistic promises. It would fly 50 times a year. It would be as routine as catching a flight. Each mission would cost almost nothing. None of that was ever close to true. To justify its own existence, the shuttle had to look both busy and safe, and those two pressures quietly ate away at the culture. NASA started quoting odds that bordered on fantasy, claiming the chance of catastrophic failure was something like 1 in 100,000. The engineers who actually assembled the machine put it closer to 1 in 100. That gap between the reassuring number handed to the public and the real number known in the workshop is where the danger lived. When the top of an organization starts believing its own advertising, the people below slowly lose the ability to say no. The physicist Richard Feynman, brought in later to investigate, said it with brutal clarity. For a successful technology, he wrote, "Reality must take precedence over public relations, because nature cannot be fooled." That one sentence is the epitaph for everything that went wrong. Reality was sending its signals in scorched components and unsettling test data, and public relations kept overruling it. Each time a part came back damaged and the mission still survived, the damage was quietly reclassified as acceptable. The line of what counted as safe kept sliding one small step at a time toward the edge. Nowhere was this plainer than a set of rubber seals called O-rings buried inside the solid rocket boosters. On cold launches, engineers noticed these seals were being chewed away by hot gas, charred in ways the design never allowed for. It was a screaming red flag, but the boosters had not actually failed yet, so the erosion was logged, discussed, and tolerated. Flight after flight, the damage was ruled within limits because so far, nothing had blown up. So far, that is the most dangerous phrase in all of engineering, and NASA had built an entire culture on top of it. The shuttle's very first flight in 1981 was a gamble that would never be permitted today. NASA put two astronauts, John Young and Robert Crippen, aboard a brand new, untested spacecraft and launched it, with no prior uncrewed flight to prove the thing worked. Every previous vehicle had flown empty first. The shuttle was so complex and so costly that they simply strapped humans to it on the maiden voyage and hoped. It worked that time, and every success made the next enormous risk feel a little more like routine. Part of what made the shuttle so fragile was its skin. To survive the fire of re-entry, the orbiter was clad in more than 20,000 ceramic tiles, each one fitted to a specific spot, each brittle enough to crumble in your hand. A single missing or damaged tile in the wrong place could let the heat pour in and destroy the ship. Technicians spent countless hours between flights inspecting and replacing them, one by one. The most advanced spacecraft ever flown was held together, in part by fussy little squares of glass. The shuttle also carried a grim distinction. On earlier spacecraft, crews had escape options, ejection seats, or launch abort rockets that could pull them clear of a failing booster. The shuttle, for most of its flights, had essentially none. Once those solid rocket boosters lit, they could not be shut off, and there was no practical way for the crew to escape during the early minutes of ascent. If something went wrong in that window, the astronauts were simply passengers on whatever happened next. The design had quietly traded away their last chance. Across 30 years, the shuttle flew 135 missions, launched the Hubble telescope, built the International Space Station, and carried hundreds of people to orbit. It was, in many ways, a magnificent machine. But 2 of those 135 flights ended in the total loss of the crew, a failure rate of roughly 1 in 67. Imagine boarding any other vehicle knowing those odds. The astronauts knew them. They flew anyway, trusting an agency that had quietly convinced itself the danger was under control. By early 1986, the machine had flown 24 times, and the country had mostly stopped watching. Launches were barely news. To rekindle a little public interest, NASA had tried something new for the next flight. It had put an ordinary civilian on board, a high school teacher named Krista McAuliffe, who would beam lessons down from orbit to classrooms across the country. Children everywhere were going to watch her launch live, and the forecast for the morning of the flight was calling for a hard, unusual freeze at Cape Canaveral, colder than any shuttle had ever flown in. January 27th, 1986, the evening before the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger, a telephone conference is underway, and the engineers on the line are afraid. The men who built the rocket boosters at a company called Morton Thiokol are staring at the forecast for the coldest launch in shuttle history, and they are pleading with NASA to stop. Their data is blunt. The O-ring seals stiffen and lose their flexibility in the cold, and below a certain temperature, they may not seal at all. They ask NASA to wait for a warmer day, and NASA pushes back hard. There is a moment in that call that has become legend. Under pressure from NASA, a Thiokol manager turns to his lead engineer and tells him to take off his engineering hat and put on his management hat. In plain terms, stop thinking about whether it is safe and start thinking about the schedule. The company reversed its own recommendation and approved the launch. One engineer, Roger Boisterly, went home that night and told his wife that people were going to die in the morning. He had done everything within his power. It had not been enough. The morning of January 28th was bitterly cold. Icicles hung from the launch tower. The temperature had fallen into the 20s, far below anything the shuttle was ever clear to fly in. In the viewing stand sat the family of Krista McAuliffe, her parents glowing with pride, watching their daughter about to become the first ordinary citizen in space. Across the country, in thousands of classrooms, children sat cross-legged in front of televisions wheeled in on carts, waiting to cheer. The countdown reached 0. Challenger climbed into a clear blue sky on a column of fire. It looked flawless for 73 seconds, but down at the base of the right booster, in the freezing air, an O-ring had failed exactly as the engineers had feared, and a jet of flame was burning like a cutting torch against the giant external fuel tank. From the ground and from the air, no one could see it yet. The last transmission from the crew was ordinary, the pilot saying, "Roger, go at throttle up," the routine call as the engines pushed to full power. A heartbeat later, the fuel tank gave way. Challenger vanished into a vast, oddly silent cloud of white and orange, and the two boosters came corkscrewing wildly out of the smoke in opposite directions. In the stands, for a few seconds, people could not process what they were seeing. Some were still smiling, assuming it was part of the flight. Then the debris began to rain down toward the ocean, and the announcer's voice caught, and Krista McAuliffe's mother and father slowly understood what had just happened in front of them. In the classrooms, teachers lunged to switch off the televisions. Millions of children had watched it live. Here is the detail that makes it worse. The one NASA did not volunteer for a long time. The breakup did not necessarily kill the crew. The reinforced crew cabin tore away mostly intact and kept rising, then fell in a long arc toward the sea, a plunge that lasted around 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Investigators later found that several of the crew's emergency air packs had been switched on by hand, which means at least some of them were alive and conscious and aware during that fall. They rode their own cabin down to the water. The impact is what finally killed them. The 7 aboard Challenger were a portrait of a changing country. Judith Resnick, a brilliant engineer, one of the first American women in space. Ronald McNair, a physicist and karate black belt who had grown up in the segregated South and once, as a child, refused to leave a whites-only library until they let him borrow his books. Ellison Onizuka, the first Asian American in space. And Krista McAuliffe, the teacher meant to make space feel like it belonged to ordinary people. They had been chosen, in part, to show the whole nation itself. The whole nation watched them die. That evening, President Reagan set aside his planned State of the Union address and spoke to a grieving country, and especially to the school children who had watched. He said the crew had slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God, borrowing a line from an old poem written by a young pilot. It was a beautiful speech. It was also, in a sense, the start of the myth-making, the softening of a preventable engineering failure into something that sounded like destiny. The truth waiting in the investigation was uglier and far more damning. The recovery operation was grim and slow. For weeks, ships and divers combed the floor of the Atlantic, hauling up twisted sheets of the orbiter, and eventually the crew cabin itself from 100 feet down. Bringing back the remains of the 7 took months. Investigators reconstructed the timeline second by second from the wreckage and the data, and it was in that painstaking work that the awful truth about the cabin's long fall came to light. The ocean surrendered its evidence reluctantly, and what it revealed, no one had wanted to know. The program was grounded for 32 months while everything was torn apart and rebuilt. New safety rules, a redesigned booster joint, a bruised and chastened agency swearing it would never again let schedule pressure override a safety warning. For a while, the fear came back, and the fear kept people alive. But institutions have short memories. The engineers who had lived through Challenger retired or moved on. The lessons faded into paperwork, and a new generation of managers, confident and busy, slowly began making the very same kind of mistake. The investigation that followed cracked NASA open. It laid bare the O-rings, the ignored warnings, the rot in the culture that Feynman described so precisely when he dipped a piece of the seal into ice water on live television to show how it hardened. NASA swore it had learned. It swore the sickness of normalized deviance had been cut out for good. 17 years later, almost to the week, another crew would climb into another shuttle, with a different flaw already quietly ignored, and the agency would prove it had learned nothing at all. February 1st, 2003. The Space Shuttle Columbia is streaking home through the upper atmosphere, 16 minutes from landing, when the temperature sensors on its left wing start behaving strangely. In Mission Control, a flight controller notices readings dropping out, one after another, all on that side. Then the tire pressure warnings on the left landing gear. The commander begins to say something over the radio. Roger, and then a word sheared off in the middle. The signal dies. Columbia never answers again. It is already coming apart 70 kilometers above the state of Texas. The wound had been dealt 16 days earlier at launch, 81 seconds after liftoff. A slab of insulating foam about the size of a briefcase broke off the external tank and slammed into the leading edge of Columbia's left wing at hundreds of miles an hour. Foam had shed on earlier flights, many times, and had been quietly filed under acceptable, the very same normalization of deviance that had doomed Challenger. This time the foam punched a hole in the wing's heat shield, a hole no one on the ground could see, invisible ruin waiting for the fire of re-entry. During the mission, engineers on the ground did notice the foam strike on launch footage reviewed the next day. Some of them were deeply alarmed. They wanted to ask the government to point a spy satellite or some other asset at the wing while Columbia was still in orbit to see how bad the damage really was. The requests were raised and then brushed aside by managers who had already made up their minds that foam was not a safety of flight problem. The engineers who understood the threat were shut down by the same institutional confidence that had killed a crew before. Nobody looked. That is the part that haunts the people who study it. There may have been time. Columbia was in orbit for 2 full weeks. If NASA had grasped that the wing was mortally wounded, there is at least an argument that a desperate rescue could have been mounted. Another shuttle rushed to the pad, the crew stretching their supplies while engineers improvised. Instead, the astronauts carried on with their experiments, sleeping and working and laughing, filming cheerful videos, completely unaware that the ship beneath them could not survive the trip home. They were, in a sense, already lost, and only the people on the ground could ever have known. When Columbia struck the atmosphere, superheated gas poured through the hole in the wing like a blowtorch, devouring the aluminum from the inside. The wing collapsed, the shuttle tumbled, and the spacecraft tore itself to pieces at 18 times the speed of sound. Across East Texas and Louisiana, people heard a long rolling boom and looked up to see streaks of fire crossing the morning sky, dozens of them fanning outward. Debris fell along a corridor hundreds of miles long. Searchers would walk that ground for months, through pine woods and swamp, gathering wreckage and the remains of 7 astronauts. Columbia's crew carried the world with them. Kalpana Chawla, born in India, who had dreamed of flight as a girl watching planes drift over her hometown. Ilan Ramon, the first Israeli astronaut, who had carried into orbit a small drawing made by a boy in a concentration camp, a picture of the Earth seen from a moon, sketched by a child who never lived to see either. That drawing burned up with the ship. So much hope and history rode aboard that spacecraft, and all of it came down in pieces over Texas. Behind the scenes, some engineers had fought hard to be heard. A NASA engineer named Rodney Rocha sent increasingly urgent emails, pleading for pictures of the damaged wing, warning that the crew's lives might depend on it. He was rebuffed. Managers told him, in effect, to stop chasing a problem they had already decided was not a problem. Rocha reportedly drafted a furious message asking whether they wanted to kill the crew, then held back from sending it, deferring to the chain of command. That deference is exactly what killed them. The debris fell along a corridor stretching from Texas into Louisiana, drawing thousands of searchers into the woods and fields to recover it. Small towns like Hemphill became the center of a solemn national effort. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through the pines, marking every scrap of the ship and every fragment of the crew with quiet reverence. The search itself claimed 2 more lives when a helicopter hunting for debris crashed. Even the act of gathering the dead added to the toll. The official inquiry that followed did not spare NASA. It concluded that the foam strike had doomed the ship, yes, but that the deeper cause was the culture, the same broken culture that had killed Challenger 17 years before. The report used blunt language, accusing the agency of a failure to learn, of letting normalized deviance creep back the moment vigilance relaxed. 2 crews, 2 nearly identical institutional failures, a generation apart. It turns out the hardest thing for a proud organization to do is genuinely remember its own dead. The echo with Challenger was almost too much to bear. The same disease, normalized risk, engineers overruled by managers. a known flaw tolerated because it had not killed anyone yet. 17 years, 2 lost crews, a single lesson refused twice. After Columbia, the shuttle program limped along for a few more years and was retired for good in 2011. For the first time since the 1960s, the United States could not launch its own astronauts and had to buy seats aboard Russian rockets to reach the station it had built. The great machine had swallowed 14 lives, and at last it was put down. Point a radio telescope at the sky, at any random patch of stars, and listen. What comes back is static. The hiss of the universe, the faint crackle of the Big Bang, still echoing across time. And beyond that, nothing. No signals, no voices, no sign that anyone, anywhere, is broadcasting. Our galaxy alone holds something like 200 billion stars, many with planets. Many of those planets old enough and warm enough for life. By every reasonable estimate, the sky ought to be crowded with civilizations. Instead, it is utterly, chillingly quiet. This contradiction has a name, borrowed from the physicist who framed it over lunch one afternoon in 1950. The Fermi Paradox. Enrico Fermi, listening to colleagues cheerfully assume the galaxy was full of aliens, asked one simple and deadly question. If they exist, where is everybody? The numbers say we should have neighbors. The oldest stars are billions of years older than our sun, which means civilizations could have risen and spread across the whole galaxy long before Earth had even finished forming. There has been more than enough time, so the silence demands an answer, and none of the answers are comfortable. We have been listening in earnest since 1960, when an astronomer named Frank Drake first aimed a dish at 2 nearby stars and waited for a pattern to surface in the noise. The effort grew into SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, scanning millions of stars across decades. In all that time, through all those years of patient listening, we have heard essentially nothing we can confirm came from another mind. Billions of stars, more than 60 years of searching, and the grand total of confirmed alien signals sits at exactly 0. The universe is not talking to us. There was one exception, a single moment that still raises the hair on astronomers' necks. On August 15, 1977, a radio telescope in Ohio called the Big Ear recorded a signal so strong, so clearly artificial in its shape, that the scientist reading the printout circled it in red pen and scrawled one word in the margin. Wow. The signal lasted 72 seconds, arrived from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius, and matched almost exactly what a message from the stars was predicted to look like. And then it was gone. They aimed the telescope back at that spot again and again for years. It never came back. So we are left with the paradox and a menu of possible answers, every one of them grim. Maybe intelligent life is simply vanishingly rare, and we truly are alone, one fragile accident in an empty cosmos. Maybe civilizations arise all the time and then destroy themselves quickly, burning out in war or collapse before they ever reach the stars, which would imply a wall waiting somewhere in our own near future. Or maybe they are out there in great numbers and they have all gone quiet deliberately for a reason we have not yet been frightened enough to work out. There is even a formula for our loneliness. In 1961, the astronomer Frank Drake wrote out an equation to estimate how many communicating civilizations might exist in our galaxy, multiplying together the rate of star formation, the fraction with planets, the odds of life, of intelligence, and so on. The trouble is that we can barely guess most of the numbers. Depending on how you fill it in, the answer ranges from millions of civilizations to just one: us. The same equation can promise a crowded galaxy or a tomb, and we genuinely cannot tell which. One chilling idea is called the Great Filter. It proposes that somewhere along the path from lifeless chemistry to a star-faring civilization, there sits a barrier almost nothing gets past, a step so hard or so deadly that it stops nearly everyone. The unsettling question is where that filter lies. If it is behind us, in some improbable leap life on Earth already made, then we may be rare and safe. If it lies ahead of us, waiting, then it is the thing that destroys civilizations before they can spread. And the silence would be the sound of everyone else already hitting it. We have done more than listen. In 1974, we shouted deliberately. Using the giant Arecibo radio dish, scientists beamed a powerful message toward a distant cluster of stars, a pattern encoding our numbers, our chemistry, a stick figure of a human, and a map of our solar system. It will take 25,000 years to arrive, and any reply another 25,000 to come back. It was mostly a symbolic gesture, but it was also, in the language of the dark forest, a flare fired blindly into the night by people who had not yet learned to be afraid. Meanwhile, our telescopes have found the planets we once only guessed at. A single NASA spacecraft called Kepler stared at one small patch of sky and discovered thousands of worlds orbiting other suns, implying that our galaxy holds billions of planets, many of them roughly Earth-sized, many in the warm zone where liquid water could exist, which only sharpens the knife. The galaxy is not short on real estate. It is crowded with places where someone could be living. And still, when we listen, no one answers. That final possibility is the one that should trouble us most. Because if the galaxy is full of life, and yet no one is broadcasting, no one is announcing themselves, no one is saying hello, then their silence might be a strategy, a deliberate choice. It would mean every advanced civilization out there has independently reached the same conclusion, that the wisest thing to do is stay hidden and make no sound. And if that is true, then we have already made a terrible mistake, because we have not been quiet at all. We have been shouting into the dark for a century, and we have even mailed out our address, etched onto a golden record, drifting now among the stars. In 1977, NASA launched 2 probes named Voyager, aimed at the outer planets, and then passed them into interstellar space forever. Bolted to the side of each one is a golden phonograph record. Onto it we press the sound of a human heartbeat, a mother's kiss, greetings in 55 languages, music running from Bach to Chuck Berry, and images of our bodies, our cities, our children. We also carved a map, a set of markers pinpointing the location of our sun, and by extension the Earth, readable by any civilization advanced enough to recover it. We drew a line straight to our own front door. At the time, it felt like pure poetry. Carl Sagan, who led the project, pictured the record as a message in a bottle, a gesture of hope from a young species reaching across the emptiness to say, "We were here, we existed, we wanted to talk." It is genuinely beautiful. It is also, some now argue, staggeringly naive, because it quietly assumes that whoever finds it will be friendly. It assumes the universe is a warm and welcoming place. And there is a growing suspicion among serious thinkers that the cosmos may be something much closer to the opposite. The chilling version of the idea comes from a Chinese science fiction writer named Liu Cixin, who gave it a name that has stuck in people's heads: the dark forest. Imagine the universe as a vast black forest at night. In it, every civilization is a hunter moving in silence. If you hear a twig snap, if you catch sight of another hunter, you cannot know their intentions. You cannot tell whether they are harmless or whether they will kill you on instinct. And because the price of guessing wrong is extinction, the only safe move, the rational move, is to fire first and keep perfectly silent yourself. The forest is quiet because everyone in it is hiding. The logic is bleak and hard to wriggle out of. In a universe where civilizations may be separated by thousands of years of travel time, you cannot negotiate. You cannot build trust across a gap that vast. And a species that looks harmless today might, given a few centuries, grow powerful enough to wipe you out tomorrow. So the safest thing any advanced civilization can do, the moment it detects another, is to erase it before it becomes a threat, quietly, from a great distance, with no warning at all. Under that reasoning, the galaxy is silent for the same reason a battlefield goes silent. Everyone still breathing has learned to keep their head down. If the dark forest is real, then the great silence stops being a mystery and turns into a warning. The reason we hear nothing is that announcing your existence is suicide, and every civilization clever enough to survive figured that out long ago, which throws our own behavior into deeply uncomfortable light. We have been leaking radio into space for 100 years. We have deliberately aimed messages at nearby stars. And on those 2 Voyager probes, we have sent a golden map stamped with our home address, coasting outward at this very moment, carrying a bright and cheerful sign that reads, "Intelligent life lives here." The record itself is a strange and touching time capsule. It holds 116 images, the sound of surf and wind and thunder, birdsong and whale song, a baby crying, greetings spoken in 55 languages, and music from all around the world. There is a message from the United Nations, and even the recorded brainwaves of a young woman in love, captured as she thought about the people and things she cared for, on the chance that some far future intelligence could somehow read the electrical echo of a human heart in the act of loving. Not everyone thought advertising ourselves was wise. Stephen Hawking, one of the great minds of our age, warned openly against it. He pointed to human history, noting that when a more advanced civilization met a weaker one, it rarely ended well for the weaker. If aliens ever visit us, he suggested, the result might resemble Columbus arriving in the Americas, which did not go well for the people already living there. Coming from a man who had spent his life studying the cosmos, that warning carried a particular weight. Perhaps, he implied, we should listen quietly and keep our mouths shut. The record was built to endure almost beyond comprehension. Encased in a protective cover etched with instructions, it is expected to remain playable for something like 1 billion years, longer than complex life has existed on Earth. On its cover sits a small sample of uranium, slowly decaying at a known rate, so that whoever finds it could measure how much remains and calculate exactly how long the probe has been traveling. We built a clock that will still be ticking long after the hand that wounded and the world it came from are both gone. The argument rages on, in a field with the tidy name of messaging extraterrestrial intelligence. Some scientists want to keep broadcasting, insisting that any civilization capable of harming us already knows we are here from the radio glow of our cities. Others plead for silence, arguing there is no undo button on a message that reveals us to something we can neither see nor understand. It is one of the few choices a species can make that is truly irreversible. And a handful of people with a few transmitters have quietly been making it on behalf of us all. Now, the probes are slow, and space is unimaginably huge, and the Voyagers will not drift near another star for tens of thousands of years. The odds of the record ever being found are tiny. That is not really the point. The point is what the gesture reveals about us. The first chance our species got to speak to the cosmos, our instinct was to shout our location as loudly as possible, assuming a kind audience, never once seriously asking who might actually be listening out there. Maybe the universe is empty and it makes no difference. Or maybe we have been extraordinarily lucky that nothing is answered. And yet, for all that dread, one of those same probes gave us the most profound image ever captured. February 14th, 1990. Voyager 1 has finished its real work, sailing past the outer planets, and it is about to leave the solar system behind for good. It is roughly 6 billion kilometers from home, farther than any object human hands have ever built. And at the urging of Carl Sagan, NASA sends it one last command. Turn around, point the camera back the way you came toward the small distant sun, and take a picture. Engineers fretted that the sunlight might damage the instrument. It scarcely mattered anymore. Voyager rotated and looked back at everything it had ever known. The photograph it sent home is almost nothing at all. A grainy field of black, sliced by a few stray bands of scattered sunlight. And they're caught by pure chance inside one of those pale beams, a single dot, less than a pixel across. Faintly bluish, easy to overlook entirely if nobody told you where to look. That speck is the Earth. Every ocean, every mountain range, every city and forest and living creature squeezed into a point of light smaller than the flaws in the camera. From 6 billion kilometers out, our whole world is a mote of dust hanging in a sunbeam. Carl Sagan wrote about that image in words no one has ever improved upon, and they are worth carrying with you. On that dot, he said, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you have ever heard of, every human being who ever lived played out their life. Every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every builder and destroyer of civilizations, every king and peasant, every saint and sinner in the history of our kind. All of it on a speck of dust suspended in a beam of light. Every war ever waged, every empire that rose and crumbled, so that some fraction of that dot could briefly master another fraction. There is something almost unbearable in the perspective. From out there, all our importance simply collapses. The borders we kill each other over are invisible. The leaders we obey, the money we chase, the certainties we cling to like life rafts, none of it registers from that distance. The universe does not know we exist and would not notice if we vanished tomorrow. Our planet is a lonely grain in the great enveloping dark, and in all that vastness there is no hint anywhere that help will arrive from somewhere else to save us from ourselves. There is only us standing on our dot. And yet Sagan did not offer it as despair. In that tiny image, he found an argument for something like tenderness. If this fragile blue speck is all we have, then our duty to one another and to the thin skin of life clinging to this world becomes almost sacred. The dot exposes how absurd our cruelties are, how petty our divisions look from the outside. To Sagan, the photograph was a quiet challenge, to treat one another more kindly, and to cherish and protect the only home we have ever known, because there's nowhere else to go and no one at all coming to help. The pale blue dot was part of a larger farewell. As Voyager 1 turned back, it captured a series of 60 frames, a family portrait of the solar system, catching 6 of the planets as tiny points scattered against the dark. It was the first and only time anyone had photographed our planetary home from the outside, all of it together from beyond the edge. Earth was just one of those specks. From out there, the difference between the world we dream of and the world we live on shrinks to almost nothing. Dots, all of them, in an ocean of black. The photograph almost never happened. Sagan had pushed for it for years, and many at NASA saw no scientific point in aiming the camera back at a planet we already knew. There was risk, too, that pointing it near the sun could damage the instrument. It took persistence and a kind of poet's insistence that some pictures are worth taking for the soul rather than the data. He won the argument by the narrowest of margins. Had he lost it, one of the most humbling images our species ever made would simply not exist. In the final image, the Earth spans less than a single pixel, about a tenth of one, caught by pure chance inside a band of scattered sunlight bouncing around within the camera. That beam of light, the thing that makes the picture so hauntingly beautiful, is technically a flaw, an artifact, sunlight glancing off the optics. So our planet appears suspended in a ray that is, in a sense, an accident. The most profound self-portrait humanity ever took is our whole world, by luck, framed inside a lens flare at the edge of the dark. Shortly after, NASA switched the cameras off for good, to save power for the long journey into nothing. Voyager would never take another picture. That final glance backward was, quite literally, the last thing it ever saw. It closed its eye on a tiny blue speck, its home and everyone on it, and turned to face the emptiness ahead, where there would be nothing left to photograph for the rest of eternity. If a machine could be said to have a last memory, that is the one Voyager carries with it into the dark. That is the strange gift hidden inside all this dread. NASA set out to conquer space, to win a race, to plant flags and haul back rocks. Along the way, almost by accident, it handed our species a mirror, and the reflection was humbling far beyond anything the scientists had intended. We are small, we are alone, or very near to it, and we are astonishingly fragile, riding a mote of dust through a darkness we barely comprehend. But the story does not end here, because even now, having glimpsed our own smallness, the same restless creature is preparing to leave again, this time for a world that will fight to kill every human who dares set foot on it. Imagine signing up for a journey where the trip itself, before you even arrive, will take somewhere between 6 and 9 months, one way. You will be sealed inside a capsule smaller than a studio apartment with a handful of other people, and there will be no turning back, no rescue, no fresh air, no escape for years. This is the honest reality of a human mission to Mars, the destination NASA now offers as our future. And every part of it, the journey, the planet, the return, is quietly engineered by physics to kill you. Start with the radiation. Here on Earth, we are wrapped in a thick atmosphere and a powerful magnetic field that deflect the constant sleet of cosmic rays and solar particles tearing through space. Out on the way to Mars, that shield is simply gone. Astronauts would soak up radiation that steadily shreds their cells, driving up their lifetime cancer risk and, in a severe solar storm, potentially delivering a killing dose within hours. There's no practical way to fully armor a spacecraft against it. The crew would just absorb the damage day after day, all the way out and all the way back. Then there is what weightlessness does to a human body over months and years. With no gravity to fight, muscles wither and bones dissolve, leaking calcium and losing strength at an alarming rate. The heart, no longer pumping against the pull of the earth, grows weaker. Fluid drifts up into the skull and presses on the eyes, permanently damaging the vision of many astronauts. The immune system stumbles. By the time a crew arrived at Mars after months in space, they might be too weak to even stand on a world with no one waiting to help them to their feet. Mars itself offers no comfort. It is a frozen desert where the average temperature sits around 60 degrees below zero, and the air is unbreathable, 100 times thinner than ours and mostly carbon dioxide. The soil is laced with toxic chemicals called perchlorates, poison to the human body. There is no liquid water on the surface, only ice and the ghosts of ancient rivers. Dust storms can swallow the entire planet for weeks at a time, and with no magnetic field, the radiation keeps pouring down onto the ground. So even after surviving the crossing, the settlers would be slowly cooked by the open sky. And still, the psychological toll may be the cruelest part. A crew bound for Mars would watch the Earth shrink behind them until it became just another star, lost among all the others, with no road home for years. Every message to family would arrive delayed by up to 20 minutes each way, making real conversation impossible. They would be more isolated than any humans in history, shut in a metal can with the same few faces, knowing that one serious mistake, a fire, a leak, a breakdown, means death with no hope of rescue. Some researchers quietly wonder whether the human mind can even survive it intact. We have already rehearsed the madness on Earth, and the results are sobering. In experiments where crews were sealed away for months to mimic a Mars mission, from a Russian study that locked 6 men inside a mock-up for 520 days to sealed habitats on a Hawaiian volcano, the science was never really the hard part. The people were. Crews fractured into cliques, stopped speaking to one another, slid into depression and boredom and quiet resentment. And those volunteers always knew that a real door and real air waited just on the other side of the wall. The machines have gone ahead of us, and they have found tantalizing things. NASA's rovers, Curiosity and Perseverance, have crawled across the Martian desert for years, and they have detected organic molecules, the chemical building blocks associated with life, along with clear evidence that Mars once had rivers, lakes, and a thicker atmosphere. Billions of years ago, it may have been a world where life could begin. Then something happened. The water fled, the air thinned, and Mars became the frozen tomb we see today, which raises a question nobody likes. Whatever killed Mars could happen here. Some of the boldest plans do not even include a return ticket. Serious proposals have floated the idea of one-way missions, sending people to Mars to live out their remaining years and die there, because a colony that never comes back is far cheaper and simpler than one that does. Thousands of people have volunteered for exactly that, to leave Earth forever, to spend their final decades in a cramped habitat on a dead world, and to be buried in red dust. Whatever else you think of them, they are proof that the old, reckless hunger is still very much alive. The private dreamers have taken up the torch that governments set down. Companies now talk openly of building cities on Mars, of making humanity a species that lives on more than one planet, of hundreds of people launching within our lifetimes. The rhetoric soars, and the timelines have a familiar ring, the same wild optimism that once promised the shuttle would be cheap and safe. Maybe this time it really is different. Or maybe we're watching the opening act of a new set of disasters, the ones that will be written about by whoever comes after, once the cost of Mars is finally paid in the only currency space ever accepts. So why go at all? The honest answers are the same ones that have driven this entire story. National pride and rivalry, now with fresh players at the table. The restless human hunger to see what lies over the next hill, even when the hill is a poisoned desert 200 million miles away. And a colder logic that some in the field will say out loud, that a species trapped on a single planet is one asteroid or one war away from vanishing entirely. And that spreading out, however brutal the price, may be the only way to last. In the end, we're going to Mars for the same reason we did everything else. Because we are afraid of what happens if we stop. Right now, as you listen to this, two small machines built in the 1970s are flying through interstellar space, farther from home than anything humanity has ever made. The Voyager probes crossed out of the solar system years ago into the true emptiness between the stars, and they are still, faintly, calling home. Their signals now take more than 20 hours to reach us, growing weaker with every passing year. Soon their power will drain away, their instruments will go dark one by one, and they will fall silent for good. But they will not stop moving. They will keep going in silence for billions of years. Think about the timescales here. The Voyagers will outlast almost everything. They will outlast every building on Earth, every book, every language, every monument we have ever raised. In 40,000 years, one of them will drift within a couple of light years of another star. Long before that, the human race as we know it may already be gone, evolved into something unrecognizable or simply extinct. And those two golden records, our heartbeat and our music and our carefully drawn map, will still be out there, coasting through the dark, a message with no sender left alive to explain it. They are, in the most literal sense, our tombstones, perfectly preserved in the vacuum, unweathered and unaging. They may well be the last surviving proof that we ever existed at all. Long after the sun has swollen and swallowed the Earth, which it will a few billion years from now, burning away every trace of our cities and our bones, the Voyagers will still be flying. Whatever we were, whatever we did, all our wars and cathedrals and love songs could one day be reduced to a golden disc bolted to a dead machine, drifting between the stars, waiting. And here is the question with no answer, the one this whole story has been circling from the very first frame. Will anything ever find them? Maybe not. Maybe the universe really is empty, and the records drift for eternity, unread and unheard. A message thrown into an ocean that has no far shore. That is one kind of loneliness. Or maybe, in some unimaginable future, something will find one, and lift it, and turn it over, puzzling at the strange, etched symbols, slowly working out where it came from. And that possibility, given everything we have said about dark forests and silent skies, carries its own quiet terror. Because if something finds our record, it will learn where we lived. It will hold in its hands the map we so cheerfully drew to our own front door. And it will face a choice about a species that may, by then, be long dead, or may still be here, small and fragile and utterly unaware. We will never know which way that choice falls. We will never know whether our reaching out was a beautiful act of hope or the most naive mistake a young species ever made. We launched the bottle into the sea. We will never see who opens it. The Voyagers were not the first messages we cast into the dark. Before them, 2 probes called Pioneer carried simple gold plaques, engraved with a drawing of a man and a woman and a map to our star, the first deliberate letters humanity ever addressed to the cosmos. Since then, we have kept sending pieces of ourselves outward. A newer probe, New Horizons, which flew past distant Pluto, carries a small portion of the ashes of the astronomer who discovered that world, so that a fragment of a human being will drift among the stars forever. We have been announcing ourselves unintentionally for far longer. For about a century, the radio and television signals of our civilization have been leaking into space at the speed of light, expanding outward in a growing bubble. Somewhere out there, the earliest broadcasts are washing over stars 100 light years away right now. Our oldest songs, our news reports, our wars declared over the airwaves, all of it is still traveling, a faint and fading autobiography of our species, written in static, impossible to ever call back. There is something almost defiant in all of this scattering. We seem unable to stop leaving traces on the moon, on Mars, on plaques and golden records and drifting probes, as though some deep part of us refuses to accept that we might simply vanish without a single witness. We bury time capsules in the lunar dust. We etch our images onto disks meant to outlast the sun, a species that knows, on some level, how fragile and temporary it is, keeps frantically writing its name on everything it can reach, hoping that somewhere, somehow, the name will one day be read. That is where this story leaves us, not with an answer, with a gesture still traveling. Everything NASA ever did, the fire and the fear, the men who burned and the men who came home changed, the triumphs and the frozen wreckage falling across Texas, all of it was our species straining to reach past the edge of the only world we have. We climbed out of the cradle for a little while. We saw how small we are and how alone and how easily all of it could end. And then we did the strangest, most human thing imaginable. We threw our voices into the dark anyway, hoping, against everything that dark has taught us, that something out there was listening. Whether that was the bravest thing we ever did, or the most foolish, maybe the last fact about us that ever matters. And we will not be here to learn the answer.